I'm Kate Soper, and this video is a tutorial with some tips and tricks for how to perform the piano and vocal techniques of my opera Here Be Sirens. Like with much new music or music in general, it's not always possible to get everything out of the score in terms of what the performance techniques are. So my goal here is just to make this piece as accessible as I can for anyone who's interested in maybe performing it. So let's get started. This is the score, Here Be Sirens. It's published by PSNY, an online division of Schott. And it's for 3 sopranos and a lidless grand piano. So there are no other performers, which means that the sopranos themselves have to play the piano. And the piano in this opera functions as a kind of witch's cauldron or crystal ball, this kind of totemic presence. And musically it is a percussion orchestra, it's a resonating chamber, sometimes it's, you know, just your standard piano accompaniment. So everyone does have to play the piano in some capacity. The piece is designed so that you can probably only have one person who's really proficient at keyboard stuff, and another person who can make their way around, and then a third person who is willing to learn like a couple of chords, and then everyone will kind of have to make their way around the guts. So let's start with the prologue. The prologue is in 3 parts, each of which has a different vocal character, and there should be a transition of character between each part. The first part is in ancient Greek. It's from Plato's Republic, and it's kind of a chant, medieval chant, homage to Hildegard type thing. One singer is always singing the text, and the other 2 are laying down a drone on a specified syllable. So this transitions into part 2, which has a much more forward, intense, direct, even nasal sound. And just one thing I thought might be worth pointing out or explaining is in measure 42, as we start to get to part 2 from part 1, meter starts to become present, dynamics get louder, and there's this direction that says quasi-yodel. Don't know if you can see that. But what I was thinking there was kind of a glottal sort of grace note idea. So I'm going to just sing a little bit of the chant, kind of getting into this harder sound. So I'll just start in the second system of page 3. Epiditon kuklonato anutan. Sorry, there's snow outside my window. The sirens are angry. Anutan epicas tu bebe kenai seina. So that's quasi-yodel. So this leads us into part 2 of the prologue, which is a Latin text from the bestiary, medieval bestiary, and this is the first part of the opera that uses inside piano techniques. So obviously there's already a lot of rep for inside piano, there's a lot of ways to do it, there's a lot of techniques that have been established. What you do will depend a little bit on what kind of piano you're using and on the venue and what they want you to do to your piano, their piano. General rules of thumb are you shouldn't use metal on metal. You should always use something softer than the part of the piano that you're affecting. But with a grand piano, you really don't have to do much to kind of get its voice to sound. So in this prologue part 2, each siren has a technique that they use, a kind of a harsh technique on their downbeats. And yeah, so for example, I'm using a glass slide here on the bolts of the piano. Didn't have to press hard at all to get a, you know, very bright, rich metallic sound. Someone's playing the low coiled strings. You can do this with a hard plastic guitar pick, something like that. That sounds good too. So yeah, just sort of a matter of finding the place on the instrument that gives you the sound that you want, and then just being precise with the rhythm. So Prologue Part 2 transitions into Part 3, which is just sort of a normal style, beautiful tone, kind of pretty melody. So that transition happens on page 6 of the opera, 5 to 6, and it's kind of in 3 stages. That's what I tried to indicate anyway. So it's, you know, starting with this really forward, hard, intense sound, then where it says meno forte, poco espressivo, poco vibrato, at different places for different voices on page 6. I think still have the intensity, but introduce some bel canto, introduce some vibrato, and then where it says molto espressivo vibrato, then start to attenuate the dynamics, become more soft. Essentially at that point you are singing bel canto, Prologue Part 3 style timbre with Part 2 music. So that transition should kind of be gradual in that way. So I'm just going to sing Polixo's part from the second system of page 5 here, hearing you go into that character. And the piano techniques also change as it becomes softer, so they are still percussive, but they're less aggressive. So in this case, Polixo goes from that to that, just stopped piano technique, just pressing your fingers on the strings. So when you hear me do that, I'll be sort of switching to like the halfway between and then the kind of fully bel canto, I hope. So here's measure 70, pick up the 76. Sirens sunt monstra maris resonantia magnis vocibus et modulis cantus formantia multis quae faciunt summitum. So that wasn't flawless, but I hope you get the idea of that kind of 3-stage transition. And because this is kind of a polymetric canon for all 3 voices, you should kind of hear that taking place over a kind of confused several measures before it finally settles into Part 3. I'm not going to go over Part 3, I think that's pretty straightforward. So let's move on to the waiting theme. So the waiting theme is a set of 3 gestures played almost always by Phano, who's this kind of archaic, empty, terrifying siren. And it says play the 3 gestures below continuously in ad lib, 1 gesture every 2 to 7 seconds, so really up to you. Just wanted to go over these a bit because especially the first 2 I think look a little similar on the page. So the first one, it says damp strings lightly with fingers to produce harmonics ad lib, and it has a cluster there of F sharp and G. So this is what that sounds like. And you should always play this with the pedal down. Basically you want to cover the entire area of the string, but just touch it lightly so that you get these upper partials. Oops, didn't do it right. So that will be kind of variable. But that's to be contrasted with the second sound, which says damp string completely to produce a low pitchless thud. And this is on the lowest note of the piano. So then you really want to press down on the string, just really try to stop it as much as you can. So you get that hard thunk sound versus the kind of more juicy harmonics of this. And the lowest string is easy to find. This cluster, I'm not sure if this is true on all piano models, but For mine, the lowest note of that cluster is right when the strings move from one coiled string to two coiled strings, but you can also just, you know, I put a little post-it on the hammers of the strings that I'm using here. So that's something else you can do. And then the third sound is just a harmonic gliss on D4. You'll want to remove the stick if you are performing this piece, but I'll just make do. So just kind of find the harmonics, and yeah, then you can just oscillate. So that's the waiting theme, and that often just kind of continues underneath the scene when the other two sirens are having their tiffs. So next, Sirenbraid. So just one thing to point out in the first measure of this number, it's not super clear, but it says for Pytho, chant in a high-pitched tone, Polyxo, chant in a medium pitch range, Phano in a low pitch height. So just something to do so that you really get a sense of homophony rather than monophony for this chant stuff. So Sirenas with Sirenas with Sirenas from the three of them. So it's called Sirenbraid because that was kind of my working title, and then I just didn't come up with a better one. But I just had this image of these three characters and these three kinds of music that were interwoven, but then also could kind of separate. So I think something that is important here is to make the three types of vocalization very distinct in their sound, but also in the affect and posture. So chanting versus singing versus just kind of reading aloud. So for those first two, you know, and this uses a brush for the first time, so this is just a wire percussion brush. For this, you just have to make sure that you lift the pedal so you don't get that when you want that. This also uses a timpani mallet on the low strings. Again, don't have to hit very hard to get a nice big beat. So the first couple measures here, you know, Sirenas men pratarna fixa. First you will reach the sirens. Just, you know, try to really make it this strange toggle of completely opposite embodiments and vocal practices. But the most important thing for me in Sirenbraid is how Polyxo, the character that's kind of the inquisitive one, breaks away from this texture. So her strand of the braid in this is just reading aloud, and what I kind of think of this as is like it's like reading a comic book under your desk in school or something. Like she's not supposed to be reading, so she's kind of like trying to pretend that she isn't. So I hope to have some feeling of kind of like, you know, participating in the music and then kind of getting distracted and then kind of being tugged back in, so that there is kind of a transition for her between performance and interior and then performance again. So, for example, if I just did some of Polyxo's part at the bottom of page 22, just moving from metered speech to free speech, if that can be something that happens in a sort of automatic way. So she's saying, this is my book here. Mankind has never lacked powerful images to aid in all the unkind things that happen in the depths of the psyche. In the chambers of the heart, toi dua piatekna. So I don't know if that was clear, and obviously I'm not moving around and I don't have a book and that kind of thing, but just some sense that it goes from, you know, chanting to kind of like chanting on autopilot to just like completely forgetting that you were supposed to be doing that and reading and then kind of coming back. I think this will make the transition for Polyxo into her first monologue a little more logical when she, at this moment when the braid is really made up of Pythos singing, Phano chanting, and Polyxo reciting. So the end of page 26. Carnality heavy with passion, and therefore the way of the soul in search of its lost father leads to the water. So just, you know, in your interior, just some sense of how you leave that behind and come back to it. And I apologize, this is getting like a little too close to like giving a potential performer a line reading. Obviously you have to interpret it whatever way makes sense to you, but just in case it's hard to understand where this reading is coming from within the context of this piece, I think that's what it is. It's this pull away from actual music and towards just literature and then kind of going back to it. Okay, next, Naufragium. So this Naufragium is the piece that is the shipwreck sound. So actually one thing to say first is that there are many air horns in this piece which are used to signal the ships in the horizon and then to signal the ships coming, like, you know, they're here. I would not recommend using an actual air horn for the health of yourself and your fellow performers and your audience. So there's a lot of different things you can use. Something I liked, I don't have one here, but I was doing a version of this in the Czech Republic and didn't have an air horn, and a percussionist had a klaxon bike horn, one of those things with the bulb, and if you take the bulb off and then kind of like blow into it, it makes a decent sound and it kind of has a cool look. I've also seen a production where they used a sound file of a foghorn. You could use a bell clapper, you could use a whip. I mean, basically some kind of recognizable sound that is going to, you know, maybe eventually trigger like a Pavlovian response even in the audience, or just something very direct and recognizable and, you know, easy to play consistently. So when that happens, it's Naufragium time. And this one has a lot of extended techniques. Most of them are ones that I think we've already seen in Prologue Part 2, this kind of stuff. The first sound, though, is a thin metal, just like on a soft metal square that you can place on the low coiled strings, and with the pedal down, hit the square with the timpani mallet. You don't have to hit very hard, again, to make a really terrible sound. So, that sounds great. Tongue trill. This is on the top of page 29, and this is in all Naufragiums. So, what did I mean by that? I meant this. What I didn't mean is this. So, it's not about changing the embouchure. What I was trying to go for was kind of a just sort of like regular clarion soprano call, so not losing the shape of the ah, and then just fluttering the tongue to give it this weird kind of like amplitude modulation to turn it into more of a battle cry. But I think my tongue is actually kind of going between the top of my hard palate, sort of towards the teeth, and the bottom of my mouth. So yeah, with all three of you doing that, it should sound kind of weird and cool. So that's the tongue trill, and then a very important thing about Naufragium, it's always followed by an immediate blackout, and we want to hear the siren voices echoing in that blackout. So you need to capture the last chord into the piano in the piano strings. It needs to resonate there. So this is a technique that happens in other places in the opera too, and it's always really important to get your face just right down onto the strings as close as you possibly can. The closer the better. The closer the more activated the strings will be. So for Naufragium, the kind of order of things to happen at this last chord are sing the last chord, head down to the strings, clear the pedal, which might take a while because there'll be a lot of noise in the pedal, and you're still singing. Then put the pedal back down, then release the sung note. So, for example, I don't know if that's coming across in the video, but it's very strong. So as you saw, even there, I had to wait a good 3 or 4 seconds for this noise to clear, so it can feel a little awkward to just be like singing with your face planted in the piano while you wait for that to happen, but it's just really important to kind of have this ghostly chord effect. Skipping right along to Persephone. So this is just, so what's happening in this piece is there's a word, the name Persephone, embedded into a multi-voiced motet. Within each voice, the syllables of Persephone are scattered around into other words. My intention was that as you kind of lose intelligibility with this simultaneity of different words, you can kind of musically put Persephone into the foreground. It's kind of like one of those moving eye pictures from the 90s where it just looks like a mash, but then you can like see the ship or whatever. So it's hard to do this. I don't know if it's maybe not totally possible, but whatever you can do, I think, to kind of help that stand out. Something that I thought worked well at a recent production by Fresh Squeezed Opera was in the final verse on page 64, to put the things that are not, the syllables that are not Persephone, make them kind of detached, put a little staccato on them. And I think that kind of worked to kind of draw your ear to the syllables and kind of connect them in a line and make a word out of it. So, for example, Pytho's part here on page 64, her Persephone syllables are Persephone. So to try to hear that within the context of all these other words, with a little staccato on the other syllables, gathering purples, pinks, and lilies, saffron maidens by her side, her lovely form awakens Hades' need. So yeah, just whatever you can do to help me out there. Okay, so Muses Entr'acte, I thought we would discuss. This is hard to demo without fancier camera work than I'm capable of. And it's really, once you figure out the choreography, then it's really just a matter of practicing. My Sirens and I, when we premiered this, I think we would just do this like it was circuits at the gym or something, like, you know, for 10 minutes before every show. But just, I'm just going to kind of describe it in case it's helpful. So the 3 sirens are in a circuit, basically. It's like, you can kind of think of it that way. So the stations are at the front of the piano or towards the audience, delivering a line, standing over here and strumming the strings of the piano, and standing at the keyboard and holding a chord, which is what is being strummed. One of the tricky things is, for continuity of sound, somebody has to apply the pedal between the transition from one person moving here to moving here, to moving here, and having this person go around to the front. But you have to make sure that the pedal is not down when anyone is strumming with the brush. So, you know, say I'm holding a chord, this person is strumming while that person is saying a line. Then they come over here and take the brush. This person comes over here. The person who is about to go take the stage and deliver a line is probably the person who would put the pedal down now, hand over the brush with one foot on the pedal, be kind of ready to go. This next person who is now coming over to the piano places the next chord and lifts the pedal. The person who just said their last line comes around. So if you're not in the middle of rehearsing this number, that probably seemed really confusing, but I think, again, once you do it, you kind of do it more quickly and you kind of get the hang of it. Yeah, and then hopefully you start having fun with it. Okay, let's move on to I'm going to skip O Sailor. That's, I think, pretty straightforward. There's some more Naufragiums. Muses Elyzium I'm also going to skip. There's a lot of piano techniques in here, including plucking the strings, and one person playing while someone's strumming. So again, you just have to be careful about where the damper pedal is, who's doing what. One thing maybe to note is that that's sometimes hard to see, is that there's a distinction between playing with the tines of the brush and playing with the back of the brush a couple times. Okay, I guess I'm going to talk about this for a second. Just another thing here is that there's, I make some use of the pentatonic scale just because it's very easy to find that on the piano. So in measure 32, somebody just, get as many black notes as you can with your arms and fingers. And then everybody can enjoy strumming that. But yeah, I think in general, difficult accompaniment, but parsable, and the singing is a little bit more normal. Okay, now across the turbid waves. So I think it might be helpful to think in this movement of the pedal and the resonance as additional instruments in a way, and kind of perform them with that much autonomy. So this isn't really specified, but I think it sounds cool in this opening. If you can, again, get your voice into the piano just by proximity to it, you're already going to be like hitting the piano a little bit to excite the sound of the body. So again, with the pedal down, you don't have to touch it very hard, but the more you can kind of get your voice to activate the strings, I think the more unusual that texture will be. Kind of hear the voice echoing. And yeah, just sort of not doing that hard at all, but it's just, glass and enough to kind of get the strings to do their spooky thing. And then just a couple other moments. So there are just some more moments of specific pedaling. So top of page 109, turbid waves. There's a moment of clearing the pedal, kind of similar to a Naufragium. So a slapping on the low strings. So that sounds loud to me, might not sound super loud on the camera, but you'll hear it live. Again, this is kind of getting in my way, so you'll have this removed. Sound of fear at the bottom of that page, a moment of having the pedal totally released. Sound of fear. And then one spot that has given some people pause, it's a little confusing on the next page, from 22 to 23. What's happening there is whoever's playing the keyboard is going to shadow the lines sung by Polyxo and Phano, and then hold those notes and this has had the pedal down, then release the pedal, and then when the other two singers strum, that chord will be present, the chord that has been built up of these two phrases. So pedal down, this is measure 22. Cries, wails, and then I'm going to release the pedal and pretend that this hand is still holding that chord, and then the other two sirens can sing etc. So yeah, just that's a moment that has given some pause, so that's what is going on there. Otherwise here, pretty much techniques that you've seen before with the pedaling. There is some movement between stopped pitches and kind of half open pitches. So on the top of page 111, resounds. It's easy to just kind of peel your finger up from the string there to kind of move between a more muted sound and a more pitched sound. Yeah. So now I want to go over what exactly I meant in the transition between across the turbid waves and in a silent valley. So what's happening here? Hopefully I will fix this immediately, and it will be in the next published version, but I just noticed that Pytho on the word black in measure 58 should have a G5, so that they have black. So typo alert, but anyway, in the last few measures of across the turbid wave, it says strum lowest 2.5 octaves of strings with hands and let ring, and this should be like a pretty, hearty strum. So yeah, I'll just take you through what's happening here. So we have those are ringing. Someone is still singing. Everyone starts to stagger that note. So that is continuing in the texture. Whoever's at the keyboard, press all of the low notes you can get in your two palms on the low end of the piano. Release the damper, which I just did. Put down the sauced, and now let go of your hands. So there won't be too much audible change there. Then the piece begins. In a silent valley. Then damp these ringing low strings with your hands. Sing. Again, this might be too delicate to get across on a camera without an external mic, but it's very clear if you do this. You can really hear the change. Now this piano part just kind of silently or quietly ghosts along underneath the singers. Because these low strings are, the sostenunu is on the whole time, because these are open, there'll be this nice kind of soft, low reverb, not as intense as having the damper, but it will really capture these piano notes. Yonder starry sphere of planets, etc. And then just in general, this is in the score, I think just another thing like Persephone that's hard to make work, maybe won't really totally work even when executed perfectly, but just whatever you can do to try to make the through sentence intelligible, even though it's being broken up among three players, would be good. Okay. Great, so we're moving right along. Here to me from Krete. So this uses another kind of the last new technique for this opera, in the opera, not a new technique, which is bowing the strings. So, yeah, again, this is, you know, among the very well-traveled ways to play a piano off the keyboard. But just to tell you how we did it. So I think I say fishing line in the piece. I've seen this done other ways. I know a group did it with a bunch of like multiple lines of wires of fishing line. Someone recommended horsehair, like the stuff that makes a violin bow, which you can get online or at your local violin supplier. I'm just using here a piece of monofilament fishing line. It's very thin, which makes it hard to handle. So I made these handles out of just paper tape. So just, you know, tape the ends together. Now, in order for this to work, you have to really put a lot of rosin in it. So you take your block of violin string rosin, and you're going to want to just kind of thread the string across it. This is hard to do the first 2 times or so, but then very quickly you'll wear a groove into the rosin with the wire because it's kind of a sharp wire. So then it becomes very easy, and you just want to make sure that you get it really coated. So I've already greased this one up a bit. I just wanted to demo a bit. And then the strings have to be put in place by Phano while a whole bunch of drama is going on with Pytho and Polyxo. So there's plenty of time, but not all the time in the world. So just figure out what's easiest for you to string them. I usually use a pair of tweezers, and then since this is one of the notes, you can just kind of thread the handle in, and then grab it with your tweezers, and if it's well rosined, don't forget you always need the pedal down, then you want to make the string long enough that you don't have to have short bows. You can have a nice long sound, also kind of looks nice. And also, if you have it longer, this is a tip from Gelsey Bell, who was the original Phano. If the rosin starts to wear off, it's after 5 minutes of doing this, you can kind of pick another part of the string. Kind of like, you know, when you floss and you move the on-duty piece of floss around. I don't know. So yeah, that is that. And there's one siren knows to play 2 strings at the same time, but that, you know, you just take 2 ends in one hand and 2 ends in the other, and it's pretty straightforward. So, actually I'm just gonna leave that there. No, I'm gonna take it out. So that's Here to Me from Krete. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, if you're using a, you know, beautiful Bosendorfer and they don't want you to touch the piano with anything, probably not the best piano to use for this opera, but you can also, instead of hitting the piano, take rocks or something. These are marble eggs. I don't know why these are in my office, but that can be an alternative in Turbid waves. It doesn't sound quite as good. These are not maybe the best ones to do it, but again, you just have to get really close to the string. So that's a little aside. And I think the only other thing I was going to mention is Odysseus, Song to Odysseus. This is the last piece in the opera. And this one is accompanied by the waiting themes technique, so it's kind of like all coming to its inevitable conclusion. But you know, it says keening chant, non-vibrato sempre, bend, gliss from pitches that's indicated. I think you can bend and gliss from even pitches that are not indicated. The sound is just really this kind of like, let's see. Odysseus, mega cool. So I think because this is the last song, and it's, in a way, it feels to me like Phaeno's first real song. Everything before, she's been kind of playing a part or joining in, but I don't know, it's nice to have it have like a different vocal character that we haven't heard, this kind of wild creature. So yeah, and then Polyxo joins in with that, and joins the waiting thing. So yeah, I think those were the only things. Okay, sorry, just another avalanche, and I think that means that it's time to go. So maybe that was Poseidon or something. So yeah, if you are performing this opera, I hope you have a great time on the island. I really loved being in it. It's just fun to be on stage with this strange universe, this instrument here, and yeah, hope this was helpful, and thanks for watching.